California drivers are already struggling under the highest gas tax in the entire nation. But now, it looks like Sacramento bureaucrats are paving the way for a shocking new charge.
Yeah.
A mandatory fee that literally tracks every single mile you drive.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're cutting through some really complex, multi-layered plans that California is pursuing.
And these plans would fundamentally replace how we fund our roads.
Exactly. Our mission here is to examine these new VMT fees, the surprising financial impact of this proposed road user charge, and, the immediate widespread public revolt over government tracking.
Which is all documented right here in our sources.
It is. And this isn't just a tax hike. We're talking about a dramatic shift in government control.
And to really get why this feels so toxic to so many Californians, you have to look at the mood on the ground.
Right.
The data. It shows this deep, really abiding pessimism across the state. A majority, that's 53%, already feel things are firmly on the wrong track.
And that number, it jumps. It jumps dramatically to 68% among rural residents.
The very people who rely most heavily on the state's roads.
And that pessimism, you can argue it's deeply rational. People are paying an enormous price and getting very little in return.
Okay, think about it.
Californians pay the highest gas and car taxes anywhere in the country.
The highest.
And yet, the roads are objectively in poor condition. Majorities rate the freeways negatively, 58% negative.
And local roads.
Even worse, 64% give local roads a negative rating. And if you zoom in on those rural residents, the ones who have to use those local roads for everything,
I can't imagine.
that negative rating hits a stunning 77%. The money is clearly going somewhere other than the asphalt.
Which brings us to the core financial threat. Sources are warning that politicians are pushing this mileage tax pretty aggressively, and it would charge drivers roughly 4 cents for every single mile they travel. Now, 4 cents, that sounds small enough to get past, maybe.
It's designed to sound small, but when you actually translate that into gas tax terms, the financial burden is just staggering.
It's a calculated bombshell, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. This proposed mileage tax is the financial equivalent of an 80-cent per gallon increase in the gas tax.
80 cents.
Let's make that practical for you.
Yeah.
If you drive a pretty efficient car, say a sedan that gets 25 miles per gallon,
Right.
paying 4 cents per mile is the exact same financial hit as paying an 80-cent surtax on every gallon of gas you pump.
That is the kind of number that just stops drivers cold. And when you stack that potential 4 cent per mile tax onto the taxes Californians already pay,
We're already the highest in the country.
the cost just explodes. It becomes untenable for middle-class families.
It really does. The analysis shows that a typical two-car California family could easily face upwards of $3,000 a year
$3,000.
in various driving taxes, fees, surcharges. And that's just for the privilege of driving on the same poorly maintained roads that the first round of taxes was supposed to fix.
So yeah, this deep dive really confirms why so many people feel the state's priorities are completely off track.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. Before we even get to the statewide mileage tax, we have to understand this. This fundamental change in how Sacramento is redefining road use. What new fees are silently creeping in right now? Why change the whole system?
Well, the core issue, or at least how the state defines it, is just revenue decline.
Okay.
As vehicles get more fuel efficient, and as California pushes its mandate for 100% zero-emission vehicle sales by 2035.
Which is coming up fast.
Really fast. The gas tax funding stream, it just dries up. Less gas burned means less money for roads. It's simple math.
That's a predictable problem, but the state's response hasn't been to just find a new, stable way to fund road maintenance.
No, not at all. Instead, they've introduced this massive layer of bureaucratic complexity, a lot of it through environmental rules.
Okay, so where did that start?
That complexity really kicked off in 2020. There was a dramatic change to the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. CEQA, right. The state's main rulebook for almost any development project.
Exactly. And the key change was moving from measuring level of service, or LOS, which basically just tracked traffic delay.
So traffic jams.
Yeah, traffic jams. They moved from that to measuring vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. And VMT measures the total length and the number of trips a new project generates.
So under the old rules, if a new housing development was going to cause traffic, the developer might, widen an intersection, add a lane, something functional.
Exactly. The fix was usually related to moving cars faster. But under this new VMT standard, That has completely changed. Now, the mitigation required is to reduce the number of trips people take, or how long those trips are.
So what does that mean in practice?
It means developers are now required to pay for these expensive operational things like free transit passes or running their own shuttle services or building new sidewalks and bike lanes.
That's a completely different cost model, and it doesn't really sound like it fixes the underlying problem of road decay or congestion.
And our sources warn that these new costs often make smaller projects just totally infeasible.
Right. And this leads directly into what you call the mitigation trap.
Yes, the one created by this new legislation, AB 130. This law created yet another VMT mitigation option. Developers can just pay a fee into something called the Transit-Oriented Development Implementation Fund.
Okay, so new construction pays a fee to offset the miles it generates. Where does that money go? Back into the freeways they're impacting.
No, and that is the key bureaucratic twist. This fund is managed by the Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD.
The housing department, not the transportation department.
Correct. So the money is directed primarily toward affordable housing and related infrastructure that supposedly reduces VMT. It's essentially a housing tax disguised as a road fee.
So let me get this straight. New housing projects are paying money to fund other housing projects under the banner of road mitigation without actually fixing the roads they impact.
That's it, in a nutshell. And here's the bureaucratic kicker. This new fee option, it offers zero guidance on how an agency determines that paying the fee actually mitigates the impact.
So it's a blank check.
It's total uncertainty. Developers have no idea what's going on. They could pay this fee, and the agency could still require other costly measures on top of it,
Double charge.
with no promise of resolution. And to add insult to injury, the governor's office isn't even expected to release the final rules for calculating this fee until January 1st, 2028.
So we're just moving forward with a chaotic system of new fees, new funds, with no clear framework for years. It's just a masterclass in prioritizing administrative mandates over functional, transparent road maintenance.
And that complexity is supposed to solve the revenue gap, which brings us to the state's main proposal, the road user charge, or RUC.
Right. The mileage tax.
Now, what's fascinating here is that the state is actively studying replacing the gas tax with a flat RUC, set at 2.52 cents per mile. That's the calculated revenue-neutral rate.
And the story they're telling is about fairness, right? Forcing EV owners to pay their share.
That's the narrative.
Mhm.
But the data, which comes from the Mineta Transportation Institute, it reveals something very different. A switch to a flat rate subtly shifts the financial burden, and often in ways that completely counteract the state's climate goals.
Okay, so let's look at who's paying the most right now. Rural households. How big is that mileage gap?
It's significant. Rural households drive 18% more miles every week than urban households. We're talking 503 miles versus 427.
And because they drive more and often in less fuel-efficient vehicles.
They're already paying 32% more in gas tax weekly. It's about $13.31 for them compared to $10.10 for urban household. So they're high-mileage drivers paying more for roads that are, by their own rating, in worse shape.
So they already feel neglected and they're paying more? What happens when you swap that gas tax for this flat road user charge of 2.52 cents a mile? Who wins and who loses?
Well, the RUC completely upends the logic of taxing based on pollution because it's a flat rate based only on miles driven.
Right.
It shifts the cost burden away from drivers of gas guzzlers vehicles getting under 21 miles per gallon and directs that cost toward drivers of fuel-efficient cars.
Wait, hold on a second. That sounds like a massive policy failure, especially if your stated goal is to encourage greener driving.
It is.
Are we saying that people who bought vehicles that align with California's environmental policies, hybrids, efficient cars, they're actually punished under this new flat RUC structure?
That is exactly what the data confirms. The financial incentive to buy a greener car, it evaporates.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Households with the least fuel-efficient vehicles, say under 19 miles per gallon, they would actually see their weekly driving costs drop by $2.35 under this RUC.
And the flip side?
Conversely, households with the most efficient vehicles, those getting over 27 mpg, they would pay $2.36 more per week.
This actively runs counter to the state's entire climate agenda. It just eliminates the consumer's financial reason to buy a ZEV or an efficient car. It taxes every mile the same, regardless of emissions.
It exposes this core conflict. The RUC is designed to replace revenue, sure, but as a flat rate, it fundamentally undermines the very environmental policies that have been driving purchasing habits for years.
And even if the change is small for some households.
It is, often less than $1 a week. But the structure itself is still highly regressive. The data shows the poorest rural and urban households get hit the hardest. They end up paying between 1.6% to 1.9% of their weekly income just on this fee.
So it's complex, it's punitive toward efficiency, and it hits high mileage and low-income drivers. But beyond all that, this is where the policy just hits a brick wall of public paranoia.
You mean the mandatory government tracking device?
Exactly. The thing required to enforce this whole system.
That's the real breaking point for public acceptance.
Mhm.
The second you tie government surveillance to road funding, all support just collapses.
And the conflict comes from how they plan to collect the fee, right?
Right. One option involves giving drivers an electronic device that automatically tracks and reports only the miles you drive on public roads.
And what's the alternative if you don't want to be tracked?
Well, you can opt out of the device, but then you have to pay a flat fee for all miles driven, including on private roads, and it's at a slightly higher cost. It's presented as a choice, but it's really an ultimatum. Comply with our tracking or pay a penalty for your privacy.
So what does the polling data tell us? Device or no device? Which do people prefer?
The backlash is enormous, and it's immediate. While initial positive feelings about the RUC were hovering around 50%,
Okay.
those numbers dropped significantly, sometimes by 10 to 15 points, right after people heard about the mileage reporting device. A strong majority in all the polls said they would prefer not to install the tracking
And
device
that's across the board.
across all demographics.
Yeah.
46% of the general population rejects it, 60% of rural residents reject it, and 55% of tribal respondents actively reject the device.
And that rejection, it's not about the tech itself. It's about this deep-seated fear of government overreach, right? The fear of how this data will be used in the future.
The data supports that completely. When asked why they would opt out, the number one reason was don't want to be tracked, guff tracking.
And how many people said that?
34% of the general
Yeah.
population
Okay.
and a stunning 57% of tribal respondents. The number two reason was privacy data security.
That sentiment, that fear of Big Brother monitoring my every location, it shows just how toxic this idea becomes once you tie it to surveillance. It almost
Right.
doesn't matter what the tax rate is at that point.
The intensity of that concern is maybe the most remarkable finding here.
Right.
When people were asked to rate their concerns on a scale of 1 to 7, where 7 is very concerned,
Yeah.
rural residents rated collecting vehicle location information to automatically report mileage at the absolute highest mean level of concern, 6.0 out of 7 points.
It's at a 7. That's not a concern. That's a scream of distrust. It just confirms this deep suspicion that this whole policy is less about funding potholes and more about complex, centralized government control.
Yep.
If fixing roads was the real priority, the solution wouldn't involve all this expensive new bureaucracy, eliminating green incentives, and mandating surveillance that a majority of citizens actively reject.
The polling is a policy lesson in itself. The state tried to solve a revenue problem with a solution that immediately triggers massive distrust, eliminates climate incentives, and creates layers of administrative cost that will, inevitably be paid for by the taxpayer.
The cost of running this complex, surveillance-heavy system could easily just eat up any new revenue.
Right.
So we've charted California's complex shift from a simple fuel tax to this multi-layered system with vague VMT fees funding housing and a deeply controversial flat-rate mileage tax. The data is clear. It hits high-mileage drivers, it negates green incentives, and it faces this enormous public pushback rooted in privacy concerns.
And the true price tag of this new system, at least in the eyes of the public, it isn't just the 4 cents a mile. It's not the potential $800 annual tax hike for an average driver. It's the cost of privacy. It's the administrative complexity. And it's this fundamental lack of faith that new complicated taxes will ever actually fix the deteriorating roads.
The whole move seems to prioritize bureaucracy over just maintaining our infrastructure.
It does. It prioritizes non-transportation goals, like forcing mitigation payments into affordable housing funds over just doing the job efficiently and transparently.
So we have to end with the provocative question here. Given that the state's own analysis shows a flat-rate mileage tax harms climate goals, requires expensive new administration, and the public overwhelmingly rejects the mandatory tracking device, if this new RUC isn't designed for the environment, isn't fair to all drivers, and isn't cheap to run, what exactly is the real purpose of this complex bureaucratic overreach?
Something for you to mull over the next time you hit a pothole or see a new policy proposal disguised as a simple reform.